Thank you. So, good evening, everyone, and very happy to be here with you this evening. On the beautiful island of Martha's Vineyard, which was in my old diocese, there's a church called the Church of St. Augustine, and it has lovely stained glass windows depicting the seven sacraments. And when you go in the front door, the first window you see is the window that represents the sacrament of penance. And there's a picture of the cross keys, the power to loose and to bind, a priestly stole, and a quote from Scripture which says, "Go and sin no more." Well, there's no air conditioning in the church, and in the summer they open the window, and the only pane that opens is the one that has the word "no" on it. So people come into St. Augustine's and they see that beautiful window and it says, "Go and sin more." Well, I must say, in the 10 years that I was bishop of that place, no one ever complained about that window. But indeed, many people think of the Catholic Church as the Church of No. One of our priests wrote a book on ethics and Catholic moral teachings, and the friars were all teasing him when it came out. They said, "Father Ronald, 350 pages to say no?" But the message of the Church is really a message of yes. Yes to God, yes to His commandments, yes to life, and yes to love. Many people are shocked, disturbed when the Catholic Church doesn't hesitate to proclaim the Ten Commandments as the path that God has given us to lead a human life and a life that leads to fulfillment. Indeed, the Church's positions are often challenging, but they are like the restrictions of parents who love their children and want what is best for them. Many people were very surprised that the Holy Father, for his first encyclical, chose the theme, "God is love." And actually, the Holy Father is simply taking us back to what is most basic about our religion. In this phrase, we discover the Christian image of God, Deus caritas est, and the resulting image of mankind and our destiny. The Holy Father in this encyclical cites the writings of St. John, who says, "We have come to believe in God's love." In these words, the Christian can express the fundamental decision of his life. Being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person who gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. They say that the way to get into who's who is to know what's what. Big ideas have big consequences. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, speaking about his childhood, talks about one of the memories that is seared in his mind. He remembers as a child, in the midst of the persecution in Russia, listening to the old people in his village talking. They were trying to explain what had happened to their country, the oppression, the pogroms, the gulag. They said, all of this has befallen us because we forgot God. Forgetting about God is very perilous, because it's only in discovering God that we discover who we are, why we're here, and what we have to do with our lives. Strangely enough, Europe seems to be making a concerted effort now to forget about God. And I'm sure you're aware that they have chosen not to even mention their Judeo-Christian roots of Western civilization in the constitutions for the European Union. They describe their origins in classical Greece and Rome, and then they skip over to the Enlightenment, neglecting the nettlesome fact that most of the art, music, architecture, philosophy of most of its history is religious. Not to mention the social service agencies, the health care, and the universities that all had their origins in the church. The tendency to forget about God, the move toward secularization, has had a profound effect on Europe. Ideas have consequences. A few weeks ago, the British news magazine, The Economist, had an article on demographics. They said that the European Union has a fertility rate of 1.4, which means that within 5 years there will be more deaths than births in Europe. In Spain and Italy, it's actually lower, 1.2, which means that in 42 years, the population of those countries will be cut in half, and the typical citizen will have no brothers and sisters, no cousins, no aunts and uncles. Then they go on to talk about the United States. Remember, this is a British magazine. They said, America is different because Americans are more devout. It comes as a surprise to us, I'm sure, but from the European point of view, we're very devout. And they said religion plays a role in their worldview. Faith begets hope, and if you have hope in the future, you're more likely to want to have children. They commented on how American congregations, churches, nurture families. They even quote Hillary. It takes a village to raise a family, Hillary said. And then they say, but that village is the church. Faith has been one of the strengths of our country from the beginning. And as de Tocqueville said, it's an essential part of our ability to bridle our extreme individualism that we have as Americans. In Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, he talks about how each generation of Americans is becoming more and more isolated, more and more alienated, more and more alone, more people living alone, eating alone, watching television alone, hours alone in front of a computer screen. But the church calls us to community, to feel a responsibility for one another. As Catholics, we're always trying to stress that every individual has a vocation, a special call to holiness and to a role in the history of salvation. And besides that individual vocation, that we're all called to be part of a mission that we share together in the church. It's been 5 years since September the 11th, the terrorist attack on our country. We have lived through the 20th century, the bloodiest and the most violent century in the history of the world. Never were so many people murdered or lost in war. In great part, the violence of the 20th century was due to the atheistic ideologies of Nazism and Marxism, both of which proposed a utopian society that prescinds from God. We were all relieved at the end of the Cold War and the constant threat of nuclear war. You're too young to remember the bomb shelters and the drills and all of those things, but there was a real danger that the Cold War was going to erupt into a war between superpowers. Now the world faces a new challenge: world terrorism. Terrorism once again began in that violent 20th century. It was practiced by the IRA, ETA, the Red Brigade, Sendero Luminoso. Some people would like to use religion today to manipulate political structures and to justify immoral means, grabbing the world's attention by terrorism. But the purpose of religion is really to humanize people, to call them home to humanity, to help us to discover God, to discover His love and His goodness. And knowing God, then we discover who we are, why we're here, and what we have to do with our lives. Dorothy Day, who had been a communist journalism, had a lover, aborted one of her children, had another child out of wedlock, went on to become a Catholic and found the Catholic worker movement. She's been proposed for sainthood in our country. She devoted her whole life to taking care of the sick, the homeless, addicts, and others in the slums of New York and many other big cities. In her biography, she talks about the quest for a better world that began when she was a child in California after an earthquake. The experience made such an impression on her because after the earthquake, everybody went out and they were living in these tents. And everybody was helping each other, sharing their food, their blankets, taking care of the elderly and the sick and the little children. She was so struck by that experience. She was her whole life looking for a way to replicate that, to recapture that sense of community and sharing, and the goodness in people's hearts that's so often brought out by a disaster. When I was bishop in the West Indies, we experienced a terrible hurricane. Left many dead and left us without buildings, schools, without electricity, phones, or water for 6 months. But you could see how a disaster like that brought out the best and the worst in people. On September the 11th, we see a crime that was planned in every detail. People who were truly evil in what they were planning. It was a real premeditated act. Their motivation was one of hatred, revenge for wrongs, real or imagined. But at the same time, that tragedy revealed many heroic and generous people, beginning with the firefighters and the rescue workers, people who risked and even lost their lives responding to the tragedy. The amount of money donated by Americans and people from other countries to help the victims and their families was something unprecedented. In our American culture, we are very focused on celebrities, sports figures, movie stars, singers, politicians, billionaires. These celebrities are not always great role models for our young people. Often they're very self-indulgent, materialistic, and self-absorbed individuals. The spectacle of people rushing to ground zero to help, an atmosphere of genuine concern and humanity and empathy, acts of self-sacrifice that we experience as a country, was truly a blessing. It was one of the good effects of those tragic circumstances. We all experienced for a short while what Dorothy Day experienced after that earthquake. People's sense of connectedness to one another, a desire to be helpful. Jesus' incarnation is to reveal to us the face of the loving Father. God so loved the world. Jesus teaches us the great commandment of love. Love of God, love of neighbor. He says that this is what sums up the law and the prophets. It's what our religion is all about. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus is just teaching about love. In the Synoptic Gospels is where we read the great commandment, love of God above all else, with all of our strength, all of our heart. Some people think that if you love God that way, that somehow it's going to diminish your capacity to love others, but that's not true at all. It's quite the opposite. The more we really love God, the more and the deeper we can love one another. In those synoptic gospels, Jesus is teaching us that love of neighbor means love of strangers, love of our enemies. How difficult that is. Chesterton said, God tells us to love our neighbors and our enemies because they're usually the same people. But when we get to the last gospel, John's gospel, then the teaching that John writes about is the new commandments. In John's gospel, Jesus washes the feet of his disciples and says, now I give you a new commandment. We'd heard the great commandment, love God above everything else, love your neighbor as yourself. But the new commandment was for the disciples, for those who were part of the household of faith. And the commandment that Christ gives to us is love one another as I have loved you. So Jesus is now the measuring stick of the love that we need to have among us as his followers. Jesus prays, Father, that all might be one as you and I are one, so that the world will believe. If the world finds it hard to believe, in part it's because we have not followed Jesus' command to really love each other the way that he loves us. How does he love us? God loves us first when we're still in sin. He loves us to the point of giving up his life for us. Greater love has no one than the one who lays down their life for their friends. Jesus said, "By this will all know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another." That love within the community of faith is to be the hallmark of our discipleship. The Holy Father, in one of his books on fellowship and communion in the church, notes that Jesus uses the word brothers and sisters only for the disciples and for those who are hungry, homeless, imprisoned. That's the only time that Jesus uses that language. I've always liked the story about Cardinal Spellman. Once he was sitting in his office. The phone rang. It was the intercom. He picked it up. It was the new receptionist sitting in the lobby of the Chancery in New York. She said, "Your Eminence, there's a man here in the lobby, and he says he's Jesus Christ. What should I do?" The Cardinal said, "Look busy." But the Cardinal was right. That schizophrenic, homeless man is Jesus Christ for us, in a distressing disguise, as Mother Teresa used to say. The Church's solicitude for the poor, for the sick, for the downtrodden, for the little ones, is part of who we are as Catholics. The poor, the sick, the lame, the blind, the halt, the lepers, they are the protagonists of the gospel. The Holy Father has reminded us that human fulfillment can be achieved only by making a gift of oneself. That is what we are called to do. The Holy Father has written his first encyclical about God's love, that God is love, because that's the way that we discover who we are, why we're here, and what we have to do with our lives. In conclusion, let me share with you a wonderful parable the Japanese have. They tell the story of a man who lived in a beautiful home on the top of a mountain. And each day he would go out and take a walk and look at the sea down below. And one day as he was out walking, he saw a huge tsunami on the horizon rushing toward the shore. And then he saw a group of his neighbors down on the beach having a picnic. He wanted to warn them. He began to shout and wave his arms. They were too far away. They couldn't see him. They couldn't hear him. And so you know what the man did? He went into his beautiful home and he set it on fire. And then his neighbors down on the beach saw the smoke and the flames. And some of them said, "Let's climb the mountain and help our neighbor to save his home." And the others said, "Oh, that mountain is so steep and we're having so much fun. You go." Well, the ones who climbed the mountain to help their neighbor were saved. And those who stayed on the beach having fun, when the tidal wave hit the shore, they were swept out to sea and they perished. Our God is beckoning us to climb the mountain of love, to be able to see his face. Sometimes we think that we're doing God a favor, but we're really doing ourselves a favor. Because human fulfillment does come only if we make a gift of ourselves to God and to others. Thank you very much for your attention.
We have about 25 minutes for some questions, for some conversation. Would you please identify yourself, tell us where you're from, what year you are, and just whatever campus affiliation you have, whether you're St. Ignatius Society or St. Thomas More Society, or whichever group you're part of, would you please identify that when you raise a question. So the floor is open. Who will be first? Please.
Well, Your Eminence, my name is Eric Versatile. I'm from Houston, I guess I'm just part of St. Thomas More here. And my question is really just, I'd just like to know what's your present involvement with the Capuchins, and also where do you see presently the Franciscan orders or suborders like thriving, and with that, what do you think is sort of like I guess the essence of Francis's vision that kind of makes their living Christ call?
I love these three-part questions. Well, I am a Franciscan, I am a Capuchin, I'm a member of my order, and the fact that I'm a bishop does not remove me from religious life. My paycheck, such as it is, goes to the provincial every month, and they consider me one of their brothers. Certainly, as I always say, our best vocation director is St. Francis himself, the ideal of Francis of being a universal brother, of the devotion of Francis to the poor and the crucified Christ, his desire to serve people, to be an instrument of peace, reconciliation. All of these things are part of his charism, and they obviously attract a lot of people to follow him. I feel certain that his family will continue to grow. My province is a rather small one. We have less than 200 men, but we have 40 men in formation right now. And so I feel very, very positive that the legacy of St. Francis will continue in the various branches of the Franciscan order, and there are many different groups. We come in all sizes, shapes, and colors, as it were. But Francis, I think, his life and his goodness capture the imagination of many people, not just in the church, but also outside of the church.
Just in the order that I saw it.
Yeah,
I'll try and
call you.
I saw you first, you second, and then third. Please.
Thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. My name is Brian Hoffman. I'm currently a graduate student in theology and getting a master's. And my question is about, I guess, I've been studying a little bit on the church in relation to the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and the church has been really great, or has improved its responses in helping to mitigate the crisis in a variety of forms. And I guess being a student here, I've been able to study with a lot of theologians who espouse the principles of cooperation and double effect, with the possible use of providing prophylactics for certain groups of people. And then my question is, do you foresee that those theological principles that are grounded in God's love, do you foresee that changing, having a development in the church's response to the virus and to those groups of people?
Well, that's a very good question, and there was just something that came out within the last day or two, which I have not yet read. But as far as the morality of the use of condoms, the church would not promote the use of condoms as a way of preventing AIDS, but certainly in the countries where the churches have had the best impact by encouraging people to live according to their Christian and other traditions, is where they have been most successful at mitigating the epidemic. And So it's a difficult situation, and obviously when you get into the areas of if someone is infected and is going to have relations and affect someone else, that's that's that is wrong, and the church would certainly discourage them from doing that. But holding out hopes that that the places where condoms have been readily available in Africa have not really had the impact that that they've had in places where people have been brought on board with living their traditions. And
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Lauren Summer. I'm from Tampa, Florida, and I'm a junior sociology major, and I'm also working on a master's of social work in grad school. So my questions kind of pertain to what do you think are the major social implications of the gospel? You spoke about the purpose of a religion being to humanize people and bring humanity together, and also to help people realize their connectedness with one another. So I just kind of like to hear you talk about the social implications, maybe bring in Catholic social teaching, and especially in relation to immigration, which has been kind of a hot topic lately, as well as just people's relationship with the poor. I think.
well, we all have a responsibility for one another. The church's social teachings, call us to have that sense of connectedness, the sense of obligation to care for one another. Certainly, in the rights of a country to control their immigration have to be weighed against the rights of other people to for safety, for I remember when I was bishop in Florida for a short time, there were many times when boats were arriving from Haiti, and people were being arrested by the Coast Guard and deported. And my reaction in talking to Governor Jeb Bush was that if the O'Malleys or the Bushes were in Haiti, they would be building a boat to come to South Florida. And so we have to, as I say, weigh people's needs as well. In the United States, we're blessed that we have immigrants coming here who want to be Americans. Their children will be Americans, and they make an incredible contribution to our country. Their energy, their values, their desire to make a better life for their children. It's like that the play about how the Irish, why the Irish are the way they are. There's a line in there about, we came to America because we thought the streets were paved in gold. And when we got here, we discovered the streets weren't paved at all. And we had to pave them. And our immigrants continue to do the heavy lifting for our country and are really a great blessing for us. And in the Catholic community, they're a special blessing because so many of them are our brothers and sisters in the household of the faith, the ones who Jesus said we're supposed to have a special love for.
Good evening. My name is Shelley Hubel, and I am affiliated with a lot of different groups here, but I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona. My question is, I understand that you're involved in the vocational discernment program, and I was wondering, for those of us who aren't called into the religious life, what would you recommend for us to do? I look around the room and I know a lot of us are interested in serving in different ways, but are kind of unsure of how that fits into the church and the development of the church and the body of Christ.
Well, as I mentioned, so in passing, I think one of the tasks that we have in the church in passing on the faith is to instill in every Catholic a sense of vocation. That in our baptism, our confirmation, we have a call to holiness, we have a call to service, we have a call to witness. And even our career choices have to be, I think, informed by that desire to serve God and serve the community. Certainly in today's world, too, the vocation to marriage needs to be lifted up. Our culture is not marriage friendly. This year, for the first time, the number of married households is no longer the majority of households in the United States. And that's not a good thing. Fewer and fewer people are getting married. And many people get married without really having a sense of vocation in the marriage. So I think the more we can cultivate that sense of vocation and the fact that we are called to make a gift of ourselves to the Lord, a gift of ourselves to each other, and we do that in our vocation, whether it be to marriage, single life, and the service that we give to others. But I think that's prime. And it's obviously the number of people with the vocation to priesthood and religious life is going to be very small out of the whole. But every single one of us has a calling in life that we must prayerfully discern and generously and courageously embrace in our lives if we're going to make a difference.
This one here, and then second, third, and fourth.
Please. Hi, Ernest.
Yeah, let's hear it.
My name is Joseph Alshani. I'm the Secretary for the First Christian Fellowship here at Boston College.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. I can't hear you back.
My name is Joseph Alshani. I'm the Secretary for the Orthodox Christian Fellowship here at Boston College. And I wanted to know, recently the Pope had met with this All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew. And I and many Catholics and Greek Orthodox and other Eastern Orthodox Christians thought that was incredible. But I wanted to know, other than, like, I know that you come to the Cathedral in Roxbury for, like, the resurrection services with the sermons of Phobius, and that's great. But in a more public sense, do you think that it's important for church dialogue to exist between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, especially now in the 21st century, when the church is somewhat, how can I say, decentralized in the eyes of the media? Do you think it's a good idea for that type of dialogue that exists between the Pope and His All Holiness and Istanbul to also take place, for example, here in the United States? That open public dialogue and show of, when I say church love, two different, so similar churches.
Well, in today's world, I think that more and more believers of every stripe are going to find commonality in the values and what is important to us versus a very strong secularization of the culture. But certainly with the Orthodox Christians, for the first 1,000 years, we were one church. And I would describe the separation between our churches as more an historical accident than a theological crisis. Luther and Calvin had different concepts of grace and theology that put them in different camps. But the faith of the believing Roman Catholic and the believing Orthodox Christian is so close that they would probably need to consult with theologians to find out how they were different. But, I mean, all of the sacraments, the holy orders, the Eucharist, confession, devotion to the Blessed Mother, we share the same fathers of the Church, the same asceticism, spirituality, monasticism. Many of the differences have been cultural, and I'm very, very pleased that here in the United States particularly, and in Boston, we have a very, very close friendship, relationship with the Orthodox community. Next year we'll be doing a pilgrimage to Rome and Istanbul with Metropolitan Methodius and Catholics and Orthodox from Boston. But really, I know that this Pope is very, very focused on trying to bring about reunification between the Western and the Eastern churches, and I think we suffered a setback because of some of the things that happened in Russia, where many Russian Orthodoxes in the Ukraine particularly joined the Catholic Church after the fall of the Iron Curtain, but their grandparents had been Roman Catholics who had been forced to become Russian Orthodox by Stalin. And so when they had the option, they went back to Catholicism, and the Patriarch in Russia sort of blamed the Vatican for that. The Vatican had nothing to do with it. And the commitment to union with the Orthodox in the Catholic Church is very, very great. And I hope that in our lifetime we will see the day when we are one church.
Yeah, thanks for coming. My name is Matt Carroll. I'm from Sacred Heart Parish in Hosendale. I'm a junior here studying philosophy and English. I guess I'm here with Kira Personel's small faith sharing community. My question is about going back to what you had mentioned before about the lowering birth rate and the increased secularization of Europe. And I'm just wondering what you believe or what you think needs to be done in the U.S. to sort of prevent that idea from hopping over the pond like so many others have throughout American history, and to whom that responsibility falls, whether it be the church, the government, or families, to make sure that the religious identity of the American people is not lost the way it seems to be being lost in Europe.
Well, I think that it really is up to us. The government is not in a position, or should they be, I suppose, to try and promote religious practice, although the government should be in the mode of protecting religious freedom. And I would say that religious liberty has never been as threatened in the history of our country as it is right now, unfortunately. But certainly we must be more aggressive in passing on the faith. We need to come up with a new apologetics. In the past, we had an apologetics in the church that was very much geared towards answering the questions of the fundamentalist Protestants who were carping on us that, oh, Jesus had brothers and sisters, or the Pope is the Antichrist, or, you know, call no man father, and all these things. We need a new apologetic that addresses the questions that modern people have about morality, about the church, about the faith. And those are the ones that then we need to catechize our young people in. A thing that I find very disturbing in so many of our parishes is that the parents seem to be willing to send their children to CCD, but don't bring them to pray together, to worship, to be part of the Eucharist. And so if people really want to be able to pass on the faith, they need to be part of a worshiping community. They need to be people who pray. And, you know, our culture is so addicted to entertainment. And so many people come to church to be entertained. And if you're not entertained, then, you know, what are you doing there? I always tell the story about when I was in the seminary, there was an interview in one of the newspapers with Flannery O'Connor, who grew up Catholic in the South where, you know, it was like 1% Catholics or something like that. And they said to her, well, what was it like being a Catholic in the Bible Belt? And she said, well, she said, when I was growing up, my best friend was this little Baptist girl. And I wanted her to come to Mass with me. I kept on inviting her. And finally, she got permission from her mom. She came to Mass with me. And I was so excited. I couldn't wait till Mass was over to ask her. I said, well, what'd you think? What'd you think? And the little girl said, wow, she said, you Catholics really have something. She said, the sermon was so boring. The music was so awful. And the priest was mumbling in that Latin that nobody could understand. And all those people were there. So, but if we come to church only to be entertained, usually we'll be disappointed. I mean, you may have the great liturgy and the preachers and the music and everything at the university, but if we don't have an interior life of prayer and an understanding that we gather as a people of faith around the Eucharist, and we must do that on the Lord's Day in order to be connected to the Lord and to one another, I think the slippage in Mass attendance in the country is one of the most disturbing things, because in an increasingly materialistic culture, if we don't have a prayer life and we don't have the sacramental life, then we're not going to survive in a life of discipleship. It's not going to happen.
Hi, my name is Katie Foley. I'm a sophomore. I'm from Minnesota, and I'm...
Lake Wobegon?
Yes. The question I have for you, at the beginning of your speech, you talked about how the Catholic Church is seen as a church of no's. And, you know, in society today, there's this perception of the Catholic Church as a restrictive entity, which sometimes exclusionary. How do you see the Church addressing that issue and trying to turn the idea that the Catholic Church is a church of no to one that is of love and, you know, preaching the Testament and where Jesus says anyone can come to the table? Like, how do you see the Church today dealing with that issue?
Well, I don't think we're doing a good enough job. The problem is we must be convinced as a people that sometimes because you love, you say no. That if you always say yes, that may be easier, but is that authentic? Is that being faithful? Is that being life-giving in the long run? So, but certainly when we say no, we have to say it with humility. But also have the courage of our convictions.
We have time for one more question. You get it.
Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Courtney. I'm from Connecticut. I'm a junior theology major here. I'm really interested in the relationship between politics and religion, and I know that you have such a high position in the church. I know that you deal a lot with, you know, not just local parishes and things like that, but also get involved with local government. I think you were recently in Brockton, Mass, talking to people about getting some different schools together, and so that it would be stronger for the children, as opposed to having a bunch of separate schools that didn't have this great teaching facility. What do you think about in the church of the 21st century about the political and religious spheres working together?
Well, in the Catholic Church, we believe that that partnership is good and that we should do it. And our whole history of particularly Catholic charities, our healthcare ministry, all of that has been done in partnership with the public sector. As far as being part of the political dialogue, I think the Catholic Church has a philosophical language and theory of the common good and natural law that allows us to be able to talk about some of these ethical questions without making it, you know, well, if you don't become Catholics or you don't accept infallibility of the Pope, you're going to hell, you know. And I thought it was interesting, too, that this president would appoint 2 Catholics to the Supreme Court. But I think, in a way, he appointed them because as Catholics, they are more equipped to talk about traditional values, but from a philosophical point of view. And certainly to be part of the political discourse, that's necessary. But in the church, we have a philosophical viewpoint and a worldview that allows us to do that. The problem is we need to have a laity that is better informed and that sees that engagement in public life as part of what discipleship is about. I think that particularly since the council, we seem to have clericalized our laity so much, where everybody feels that the way to be a good Catholic is to somehow be involved in some liturgical function. Now that's all wonderful, and the liturgy is the highest point in our life, but the competence of the laity should be to transform society with the values of the gospel. It's much easier to be a lector, but the other is really what the laity is being called to do. So we have to do a better job equipping you spiritually and theologically to be able to do that. But does that answer your question? Okay.
Now, Father Bashan, the Cardinal Secretary, has assured me that we can still take 2 or 3 more questions, assuming you're not exhausted. So I saw somebody who had a hand in the back, I believe. Maybe it was, yes, I believe you had one. So why don't we say 1, 2, and then there was a third. Why don't we say that those will be the last 3? So please.
Your Eminence, thank you for coming tonight. Boston College has, especially in the last few semesters, had really struggled with issues between maintaining its Catholic identity, but also allowing for the academic freedom that is necessary for a university to excel in its job. And especially last semester, a new policy was implemented that called for a balance of speakers, that if a speaker was brought to campus espousing viewpoints contrary to church teaching, that the counterpoint, the counterbalance of the church teaching also had to be presented in some way. And it caused a bit of an uproar because many saw it as the university infringing upon their academic freedom. How do you see the relationship in the university setting between maintaining the tradition, maintaining the Catholic values that make a place like Boston College so rich and so strong, and the necessary ability to push those values, to push the envelope, to question them in the realm of academic freedom?
Would you just quickly say who you are, please?
Oh, I apologize. Nathaniel Campbell, I'm with St. Thomas More, I'm a senior.
Well, in the Catholic University, we believe in fides querens intellectum. You know, we begin with faith, and faith helps to illumine the path to find the truth. And so I wasn't aware that there was this controversy or that we're trying to do a balancing act between Democrats and Republicans here or something. I would hope that as believers and Catholics at a Catholic university, that we would be very clear as what we are about and what the teaching of the church is, and at the same time try to be informed about other opinions, but certainly the primacy of our dedication to truth, our belief in the truth, and our belief that faith helps us on that path to discover the truth.
Good evening, Reverend. Thank you for coming. My name is Kelly Donahue. I'm a senior here. I'm a finance major. I'm a regular attendee of the traditional Latin Mass at the Holy Trinity in South End. I was curious what you believe the role of the traditional Mass can be in the future of the Church.
Well, in Europe, the traditionalists in and outside the church are very, very numerous. In the United States, the numbers of people that are attracted to participating in a Tridentine Mass, whether in the church or in schismatic communities, is very, very small. If it were only the United States, I would say, you know, this is going to disappear. But in Europe, we may be talking about 1 million Catholics. So I think the Holy Father's desire to reach out to those who have separated themselves from the church has occasioned a reassessment of the Tridentine liturgy in the Catholic Church, and perhaps a renewed appreciation of it. When I was named a cardinal last year, we had a one-day consistory with the Holy Father the day before the ceremonies, and the whole day, just the cardinals and the Holy Father, and there were 3 topics, and one of them was about the traditionalists in Europe and how to bring them back into the church. And they spoke about a group of 30,000 Lefebvrites in Brazil who came back into the church as a group. So what the future is going to be, I don't know, but certainly this Holy Father is focused on trying to heal the divisions in Europe, and at the same time to safeguard the desire of Catholics within the Church who have an affection for the Tridentine Mass. I must say, when the indult first came, we all expected that it was going to be people my age, you know, we old fogies, that would be going to these Tridentine Masses, because that's what we grew up with. As a child, you know, I started serving Mass when I was 6 years old, and, you know, learned that in tribo altare Dei, Deum quaetificat juventud meum, and all of the prayers, and that was the Mass for us till the time I was ordained, practically. But the truth of it is that many young people and young families are gravitating toward the Mass. And I think that part of the reason is that people are looking for the sense of the sacred, which is very, very strong in the old liturgy. And the beauty of our musical tradition and the Gregorian chant and the polyphonic music. I remember Cardinal Wright, who was our bishop when I was in Pittsburgh. He said, when the Son of Man appears on the clouds of heaven and comes to judge the living and the dead, they will not be singing Kumbaya. Said they will be singing Sanctus, 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 Dominus Deus Sabaoth. So the Mass is very beautiful, and I'm sure that it is going to perdure in the Tridentine Mass in the church. But in the United States, I think it's always going to be a very limited number of people that are involved.
My name is Kate Brown. I'm a sophomore in Toronto, Massachusetts. I'm here with the Liturgy Arts Group. And my question, a lot of students on campus do not no longer go to Mass because they don't feel like they're getting anything out of going to Mass. And I was wondering if you have any suggestions on how these people can get more out of going to Mass and like
I think that it helps if we have a prayer life first. You know, people that drag their kids to church, that's wonderful, but we need to teach them how to pray. And only if we pray, then the Mass begins to make sense. But as I said, we live in a culture that is so addicted to entertainment, and we've come to see the liturgy as entertainment, and we judge the value of the liturgy as how entertaining it is. But if we have a sense of God and of prayer in our life, then when we come to the liturgy, then we see it through an entirely different way. But helping people to learn how to pray is where we need to start. Because once they pray, then the liturgy will mean something entirely different too. Was that the last question, Tim?
I think that was the last
I see all these refreshments over. Aren't you going to offer them to anybody?
Thank you all for being with us, and thank you to His Eminence for joining us this evening. Please join me.